welcome to Season 6 of How I Made It Through. As I've said before, it is often through pain and suffering that we learn our most profound lessons. It is through courageously exploring the inner landscape of our lives and seeking healing that we transform. Joining me this season is my newest co-host, Bernadette Thompson. Bernadette and I invite you to join us, now twice a week, as we continue to explore the extraordinary stories of those who've had near-death and spiritually transformative experiences, or are simply wise and old souls, sent here to help the collective awaken and heal. Our show reminds us that death of the body does not mean death of the soul, and that indeed we do transition into the wonder of the afterlife and come back again and again and again. Our hope is that each episode will serve as inspiration for your own spiritual discovery. We thank you for joining us in this powerful learning and ask that you subscribe, comment, like, and share. Together, we can spread the growing awareness that we are all infinite souls sent to Earth School at this very unique and miraculous time in human evolution. Welcome to How I Made It Through, and today's guest is Julie Cluff. Julie is a grief specialist, speaker, and intuitive angel guide. She's the host of the podcast Light the Day and Build a Life After Loss, and the author of the book Miracles in the Darkness. After healing from a sudden death of her two youngest children on Mother's Day in 2007, Julie experienced a powerful shift in her spiritual gifts and understanding. She learned to communicate with her children and others across the veil and began channeling messages from the angelic realm. Today, she shares angel messages and uses her gifts to help others to connect to their inner wisdom and spirit team. Julie is first and foremost a wife, a mom, and a grandma. She loves reading, watching movies, playing tennis, painting, playing board games, and playing the piano. Welcome.
Lots of playing, lots of playing.
As it should be, right? As it should be. So we started with the fact that you and Bernadette have so much in common. I'm curious, before the death of your two children, what was your spiritual path, belief system? What was life before that tragic event like?
Yeah, before that event, I was already very spiritually connected. I definitely felt a connection to God, source, whatever the word is, for you, but I definitely felt that connection. I already had a certain level of what we would call clairaudience or clear hearing because I would hear messages. That picked up after my kids died, and it took me some time to kind of understand, okay, who's speaking to me, and always before I just was like, "Oh, it's the Holy Spirit, it's God," but then my understanding broadened, and I started to understand the angelic realm. I started to understand how to connect with specific people on the other side. I'm even practicing mediumship now and making those connections for others as well. So it, definitely has shifted and changed, and other what we would call clairvoyance, and clairsentience and claircognizance, so those types of things kinda came online as well, and in a way, they were always there because I can look back and I go, "Oh, yeah, I woke up in the middle of the night when I was 20 something with this whole conversation going on with my head, and I certainly wasn't talking to myself." Because
Mm.
they were giving me information that wasn't coming from me, because I was basically arguing with spirit in the middle of the night one night. So,
Well,
they were giving me instruction, I'm like, "Are you sure?" They're like, "Yes, because of this," and I'm like, "Are you sure?" So so that was happening before, but it definitely has picked up and changed and altered over time.
fascinating. Did you have it as a child?
I I did. It's interesting because it was so intertwined with religion at that point. I hadn't really learned how to separate religious belief from spiritual experiences, which I have untangled, more as I've gotten older and understood things in a different way. So in many ways, my understanding as a young child was very, um, wrapped in the container of
Yeah.
religion.
Mhm.
So that was definitely there, but it was just understood differently. I'll just leave it at that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No,
So, go ahead,
no,
Bernadette.
I was just gonna say that that resonates very much with me. So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. That
And Bernadette, I know you have this lovely, interest and passion for genealogy, and at the age of I believe it was my 8th birthday, my great-grandmother who was still living, she lived until I was 21, she gave me a book of our genealogy when I was 8, and I can remember and I'm, like, 8 years old. And I can remember sitting at the dining room table and adding names and dates to that book because this was my mom's side of the family, so then I wanted to fill it out with my dad's side of the family, so I started asking family members different things, and so I have a very distinct memory of that, and then when I turned 35, when about the time my grandfather passed away, I started to dig really deep into my genealogy and started visiting libraries. We lived near the Dallas Library, which is one of the I think it was the second largest genealogy I mean, so there's a lot of connection there and connection with the ancestors and these experiences that I had. In fact, one of the things that really drew me to it was that I had heard a couple of stories about people talking about being visited by their ancestors and being given information, and I was so enthralled with that. I was so enthralled with that, and I just remember as I was doing that study that I would have these experiences where I would read names and dates, and it was almost like I knew them. Like, I could almost like, when you see a baby that was died and buried just before Christmas, you can't help but have that empathic pull towards them and that love and that care for them. And, so yeah, that was part of my experience even before my kids died. I had that experience. I had one I was just thinking about this week, in fact. I ran across a book that I have that's called, Psychic Roots, I believe is the name of it. And they explore the idea of the psychic, connections with genealogy. And I had this experience where I received some information about my dad's family, and I'd written it on a little note, and I couldn't find it anywhere, and there was no way to retrieve that information again. I knew it was on that note, and I didn't have access to the same resource to find that information again, and I was distraught, I was looking everywhere, and a few days later, I walked into my house, and in the hallway between the garage and the kitchen, that note was sitting on the floor in that
Oh,
hallway. There was no explanation of how it got there, none
yeah.
whatsoever.
They
So
know how to move things around. They
yes,
very
yes. So I just wanted to kinda share some of that because I love that we have that connection.
yeah. For anybody that's listening and not watching, I've had a huge smile on my face.
I love that. Julie, you talk about, and I'm going to use your words, the soul plan. So, as anyone who's a parent and here with three mothers, the thought of losing a child, let alone two, is probably all of our worst nightmares, right?
Absolutely.
So, how does that connect to your soul plan, or can you help to unpack how that incident, and you don't need to go into the tragedy, you're welcome to, but whatever feels right, how that connects with soul plans and how that served as, I imagine, a huge pivot point in your life, the biggest?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was no stranger to grief before my kids died. I had lost, my first marriage to divorce with 3 young children. I had lost my brother to suicide. Those things happened pretty close together. And then I remarried. We had three more children. We lived as one big happy family with 6 kids, and so it was a busy, full household. And that Mother's Day, I was taking my 3 youngest children to go visit their grandparents, and as we were traveling, um, we were in a rollover car accident, and I had fallen asleep at the wheel, having never felt tired that day. That is the oddest part of the whole thing was
Oh.
typically when you're driving, you'll have those moments and you'll stop to get a Diet Coke or whatever you get to kind of wake yourself back up.
Mhm.
I never felt tired that whole day that I
Mm,
was driving, and then to wake up bouncing along in the median between the eastbound and westbound highway was just
mm,
astonishing. So when I tried to pull my SUV back up on the highway, I felt the wheels just lift off the ground and my car just started to roll with my 3 kids in it, and, Carrie and David were thrown from the car, and it was a little while before I found out, if they were okay or not, and, yeah, it was just a shocking, shocking experience, as you can just imagine. But I wanna kinda go back a little bit because before the accident happened, about a month before the accident happened, there were several things that happened in that month. I had gone to a funeral and I walked in and I saw this young husband whose wife had died. They had small children, and I saw him and it was like this download from heaven. It was the most unusual experience. I just had this like download from heaven that that he was loved, that he was loved and supported, and it was so unusual. I thought, why I don't even know this man that well. Why am I experiencing this? It just made no sense to me. I had felt this sadness during that month that I could not explain.
mm, mm,
I'd had some other experiences along those lines, and none of it was very explainable. It didn't make any sense. And then after the accident happened, and of course, several months later, as I started to put these pieces together, I realized that my soul knew that this was going to happen. My soul knew that Carrie and David were not going to live, that they were going to pass away.
mm.
My daughter actually had left in her Bible. She had tucked in this from one of the programs from church, and she had drawn this little picture, and she drew a picture of her, like this little stick girl, and she put her name over the top. That's how I know. It says Carrie. And then drew another stick figure and she wrote Jesus over the top of it with an arrow.
Mm.
And that was in her scriptures. That was in her Bible when we went through her things. So her soul knew. Her soul knew. And then going to that point of the accident, as the car was rolling, I heard a voice that said, "Bring your arm in." And that, however, it was calm, it was peaceful, it was just this, when I think of that voice, it was just a very peaceful, "Bring your arm in." And of course, the circumstances were nothing close to peaceful. But somehow I heard that voice and I listened and I brought my arm in. I don't even know how I did that, but I recall doing that. And shortly after that, I met a couple of women who had lost their arms in a rollover accident. So when you start putting all these pieces, there's so many pieces like this. When you start putting all these pieces together, you look at it and you go, okay, if that voice could tell me to bring my arm in, that voice could have said, "You're getting sleepy." That
Yes.
voice could have said,
Mhm.
"Wake up." It all all starts to come together into this knowing that there's more at play
Yeah.
than just me falling asleep at the wheel. Even the therapist that I was working with, because I had severe PTSD, um, complicated grief, all the labels that you want to put on it. And the therapist that I was working with, and we were doing EMDR, which was extremely helpful to me and my PTSD. And she said, she said after one of our sessions, she said, "That moment where you fell asleep," she said, "I could just feel like it was like a hush went over the whole car." It really felt like that because it was like one moment we were all interacting and the next minute the whole car was asleep. I mean, it was the strangest thing. I'm still trying to I realized recently that there's some time lost in the
Mhm.
accident because when we stopped rolling, I couldn't see anything. Everything was dark. I could hear, but I couldn't see anything. And I do feel like there's some lost time in there somewhere, and I'm not quite sure what happened during that time, but, there were so many interesting things that happened. When we got to the hospital, my son James, who had been in the passenger seat, he was 12 at the time. Carrie, died at 10 and David died at 8, but James needed surgery on his leg, and the doctor that developed the surgery he needed was there in the hospital. Much to the astonishment of everybody there because he's like they were all I could hear everybody saying, "Why is Doctor Rush here? He shouldn't be here. It's Sunday, it's Mother's Day." All these things were being said, and of course, I look at it and I say, "I know exactly why he was there. He was an earth angel to our family
Right.
in so many ways. Not only did he help our son, but he was such a loving man who um just surrounded our family with understanding and love and help to navigate the medical issues with the urgency of getting home and bearing our children. So there were just so many astonishing things. 6 months after the accident, oh, less than that actually, I walked into a store. It takes a while for our human self to come to terms with the new circumstances. And I walked into a store and my thought immediately, because I saw this Halloween costume, and my thought immediately was, Carrie would love that costume. And then, of course, immediately the shock rushes in. She's not here. She doesn't need a Halloween costume.
Mhm.
And in that moment, I said in my mind, I said, why did this have to happen? And I heard back. I heard, "They're exactly where they're supposed to be." And I said, "But why did it have to happen this way?" Because it's hard enough losing 2 children. It's a huge hurdle to have been the cause of their death. And I heard back when I asked, "Why did it have to happen this way?" I heard, "How would you have liked it to happen?"
Mm.
And as I pondered that question, there could not have been a better answer to that question. And of course, that's the beauty of Spirit speaking to us, of our angels, our guides speaking to us, is that they know the best answers. And when that question was asked, then I had to go searching within myself
Okay.
for an answer. And there is no good answer to that. Actually, 5 years before this accident happened, in a freak accident, David was 3 at the time, Carrie was 5. We had just moved into a new house, and it was springtime. They had opened the window to talk to the dog in the backyard and leaned on the screen and fallen onto the pool deck, both of them out the second-story window with minor, minor injuries. Carrie had 2, minor fractions in her wrist, and David had no injuries whatsoever. And it was almost like that was a possible exit point for them,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but they were spared, and we were given 5 more years.
Mm.
But when I put all the pieces together, and of course this doesn't happen overnight, I do believe, and I've thought about this a lot. I do believe that at the time of the accident, I had everything I needed to heal. I just needed to integrate it, and which is hard to explain.
Mhm.
But all the pieces were there. It just took time for me to integrate it and to heal from the experience. Yeah, as I look at the whole thing, I have to I just know that I could either be their mom for 8 and 10 years or not have been their mom. That
Mhm.
this was part of my soul plan, this was part of their soul plan. Even so, our 2 oldest daughters were off at college shortly after the accident. Our oldest daughter was at college, and our second oldest daughter just graduated from high school and left for college as well. And we had 2 teenage boys at home, and they were, when the accident happened, they were 15 and 12, and a couple of years down the line, I just remember thinking, just kinda talking to God again saying, "Why? Why?" I I've got teenage boys, and my girls grew up in a totally different household. They're growing up they're in their teenage years, the most challenging time of life, and they've got a mom that's
Yeah.
completely checked out. Like, I was
Mhm.
there, I was taking care of things as I could, but I wasn't there in those really, really crucial, ways, and I remember thinking that, and I heard, "They're having the experience that's for them too. This is their experience too." And I came to an understanding that it wasn't all about me, and it wasn't all about, like, what I was experiencing and why couldn't I do this or that or the other, that God knew, how whatever your interpretation of God's source, universe, knew that my soul knew before the even accident even happened, already knew that these were gonna be the circumstances of not only my life, but my whole family's life. And if we look at these things and look at it like, how is this for my greater good?
Mhm.
And that's not a question we ask in the first week, the first year, the first 2 years, the first 3 years. That's a long-term question. I'm not at all suggesting that we spiritually bypass the challenges of our life. That is not the goal at all. But we can start to see in hindsight with that broader view
Mhm.
how these all these pieces move together. So I could see the soul plan for my kids. I could see the soul plan for myself, for my teenage boys, for my whole family. And it just became extremely apparent to me.
Mm. That hits very obviously for me, hits very close to home. Not I didn't lose children, but I did lose a husband in very he was an alcoholic and it was a very chaotic time during. And the question that I have the feeling that I'm getting is the higher purpose that you have come to, and whether you felt that do you feel what do you feel about that higher purpose of being able to not only share your story, but the other gifts that you have that have come from this experience that you went through?
Yeah, and again, that's something that we kind of understand further down the road, but I do remember this moment where I thought, "I could have died in that accident too. There's a reason I'm still here." And and that doesn't have to be, and I always share with people, that doesn't have to be some grand purpose. The reason I'm still here could just be because I have more life to live. It could be because I want to fulfill these relationships with my children who are still here. There could be so many reasons that we're still here, but there's purpose to our life. There's it's regardless of what we do, there's purpose to our life.
Mhm.
And sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, sometimes I wanna connect, well, what am I doing? How am I showing up? And connecting my purpose with how I'm showing up, and certainly there's an element of that, but there's purpose in just us being here and interacting day after day after day. I when, So I'm in my 60s, and all this happened when I was in my 40s. And when I was a few years ago, when I started to develop my grief coaching programs and so forth, I remember again talking to God saying, "Why am I just finding this now?" What I'm like, I'm old. I should be retired. What am I doing? And I in that moment, again, I heard, "You've always been living your purpose."
No.
Mhm.
So, I was living my purpose when I was homeschooling my kids. That's another aspect of my story. I was a homeschool mom at the time that they passed away. I was living my purpose when I was uh, driving the kids back and forth to school before I was homeschooler, or
Yeah.
I was always living my purpose. We're always living our purpose. So I thought that was an interesting answer.
Yeah.
And then I had this experience 5 years after the accident, and I'd had this miraculous healing. I want to go back a little bit. 3 years after the accident, almost 3 years to the day, I I ha it was a special prayer that was offered, kind of in a church circle type thing, and it was like the lights went on. I was doing so poorly at that point. I was really drowning in my grief,
Mhm.
and the lights came on, and it was like an overnight healing. That didn't mean that I was perfect in that moment, or, everything was good. It was just such a difference. It's like I tell people, before all this happened, I was walking through this world asleep. After it happened, I died, and when I received that healing, I came alive. I really came alive. But 5 years later, so 2 years after that experience, I met somebody for the first time through my mom, and, um, and my mom had asked me to share my story, and I was like, at that point, I wasn't used to sharing my story, and I don't remember the circumstances right now of why she asked me to do that, but I remember that, "Oh, I've gotta share this," but I did. I've just briefly shared that, my children had died in this accident, and that I'd, um and that journey that was. And as we were leaving the restaurant, this man grabbed me by the arm and he said, "Julie, you're supposed to do something with this."
Mhm.
And it was like lightning went through my whole system. And it was as if God was standing right in front of me saying, "You're supposed to do something with this."
Mhm.
And I didn't know what that was, and it took me a few years to really kind of figure, and I'm still figuring it out. It's still developing. I do this grief program. I'm working with angels and sharing angel messages, and then I'm practicing mediumship. Like, it's evolving,
Sure.
and that is, the beauty of the experience, is to allow it to evolve. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
to allow it to. Well, with this sharing angel messages, and you speak of the angelic realm, can you say more about the angelic realm and angels?
Sure. Let's see, where do I wanna start? 'Cause I do long classes on this, so I'm like, "Okay, let me think." So,
Condense it.
yeah, a couple of things that I would share is that what I've discovered is that, and what I experienced myself before I really connected with this, was that this idea that the angels are judging us, and we often have this feeling that they're judging us. But what I've come to learn is there's no judgment. No judgment from their point of view. And I often compare it to, like, do we judge a toddler that's learning to walk? You know, "You should have walked. Why didn't you walk? You only took 2 steps. You should have taken 5." Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so if we can kind of think of it that way, we are the toddlers. We think we're so sophisticated. We think we know so much. The more I know, the less I know, you know? Um, but from their viewpoint, they're just loving us. They're loving our courage to be here. They're loving that we are courageously living our life plan, no matter how messy that looks. They are loving us and supporting us and wanting to be there. I can't tell you how many 11:11s I have seen in the last few days and even today. 11:11. So noticing some of those signs that they're sending to us and connecting and just being in that space of acknowledging their presence
Yeah.
and acknowledging their help. I had a a a couple other things I'll just mention because I think they're really common misconceptions, and one is that we can't bother the angels because they're busy on other errands. Time and space is not the same there as it is here, okay? I might be on this interview right now, and so I'm not available to go fix dinner or something, right? But that's not the way it works in the angelic realm. So we never have to worry about bothering them, that we're taking their time. If we ask for their assistance or we acknowledge them and communicate with them, that somehow we're taking them away from some other thing that's more important.
Mm.
There's nothing more important than us. There's nothing more important than you. There's nothing more exciting for them than to hear you talking to them and speaking to them, communicating with them, acknowledging them, asking for their help. That's what they want to do. And the third misperception that I will share, is that I have found that a lot of people feel like angels show up at the crucial moments. They show up in a rollover accident. They show up when there's a house fire. But I will say they are always here. Always, always, always. And they can show up for us not just in the tragedies and the challenges of life, but in creating beauty in our life.
Mm.
Give you an example. Um, Almost 2 years ago now, I was on a whale watching trip off the coast of Mexico. It was the first time I'd ever been on a whale watching trip, and I'd heard so many exciting things about them. But it was the middle of the afternoon. It had been a long day. I was feeling kind of grumpy. We'd been out there on the water for a while. All we'd seen is one distant tail in off in the distance. And we weren't really seeing anything. And we were on a boat that was not very comfortable. I was just grumpy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I heard, "Julie, you have angels." And I was like, "I have angels." It was like lifted my spirits. And I began in my head saying, "Please bring the whales close to our boat. Please bring our boat close to the whales. Angels, please bring the whales close to our boat." And I just repeated that in my mind. And with just so much enthusiasm and excitement for what was going to happen. And within 10 minutes, our boat was surrounded by whales.
Wow.
Whales on our right side, there were whales on the left side, there were whales in front of us, just dancing in the water, putting on a show. And then there was a whole school, is that the right word? Pod, I think, is the right word for dolphins. Dolphins swimming along our boat,
Mm.
flying out of the air. I mean, it was spectacular. I was so filled with just wonder and bliss that I couldn't even pull out my camera to take a picture. And it's like, I just had to be there in the moment experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, and then our guide at the boat there said, "It's time for us to go back." He's like, "This has been spectacular, but it's time for us to go back." And and in that moment, they all started to dissipate, and this one whale came up, and you probably have seen it before, where they lift their tail and they start slapping the water. It was almost like a goodbye.
Mm. A wave, like a
Yeah.
wave.
Waving goodbye, and then we left, and it was, just this beautiful, beautiful moment. And that's just an example of and every moment and this is the other thing I'm just gonna I'll just say because I shared this spectacular story. This is not the everyday. The everyday is noticing the 11 and 11. The everyday is I was sitting on my back patio one day and this huge bee just came and just hovered right in front of my face. I felt no fear. I wasn't afraid of being stung. it just hovered right there in front of my face.
Mm.
Just noticing those little things and saying, "Oh, that's my angels acknowledging my presence."
I think so many people can relate to that because it happens all the time, whether it's numbers. I had an experience where I asked my angels, "Can you show me a sign?" And I was picking up a pizza. And as I exited the restaurant, I saw a rainbow and I thought, well, that's kind of corny. That's not good enough. And so it started to rain and I couldn't find my keys in my bag. So I ran back inside the restaurant. And then that song, just call the angel in the
Right.
morning. And it was like, okay, that's good
Okay,
enough.
I get it. I'll take it.
I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a
No,
sense of humor.
he sense of humor. Yes. So
Right.
how me understand you say angels, and then I know there are spirit guides, and then there's God. What's the difference between angels and spirit guides? Does it matter? Is there not? What is your perception of that?
I think there's different philosophies on that. I tend to use the term angels universally to represent the angelic realm as well as the spirit guides. Um, one explanation, like spirit guides are a lot of times those so we have everybody has at least one spirit guide. We all have that's with us our whole life. That's just there our whole life guiding us through. And then we have multiple like in my work, I have actually experienced when somebody's grieving, I have experienced seeing not, in my mind's eye, they're grief angels. So there's
Mhm.
specialty angels that come in at different points in our life when we need special help. I think of my brother who died, uh, many years ago, and when I wrote my book, and I thought, "Well, I didn't write this," and then I realized my brother worked for a publishing house when he died, like, he was an editor. I'm pretty sure he was there helping me. After that whole experience with the whales, I received messages from my daughter and my son at different times
No.
telling me that they were part of the team that brought the whales close to the boat.
Mm.
So we can look at it as different things. So I will say that I, will channel angels, so I will receive angel messages, and that comes from what feels like to me and what they've explained to me, it's like a collective of angels that speak, through me to others. But I also will communicate directly to my daughter, directly to my son, directly to my brother, and one of the ways that I do that, which I think, we can do it in our mind, but I think it's really helpful to do it on paper. So I will write a letter, and when I say paper, computer, I do it on my computer. I'll write a letter to my daughter. Write a letter to my son, and I'll address them. And when I say them, I'm doing this separately. So I'll address my daughter and I'll say hi, and I'll share a little bit, and then love you, mom, and then I'll say dear mom, and I'll just listen and I'll just write whatever I'm hearing.
Mm.
And same thing goes with any other relationship that I have with someone on the other side. I can communicate with them because they're always present. They're always available. It is that we can't we can't fully comprehend from our vantage point here what's happening on the other side.
Mhm.
What we can do is acknowledge that it is happening, acknowledge that love and support that we always have, and allow for the fact that it's different there than it is here, and that they have greater perspective than we do.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's, beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's this idea of that, we can connect over there, that we have that ability. It's and that we all have the ability. That is,
Absolutely, and that's the first thing that I want people to just recognize is that we all have these angels and all around us, and we live in a world that is full of fear messages.
Yes.
And so we tend to gravitate to the fear and and I remember, kind of early on in this the day so I will tell you that the day after that whole experience with the whales was when I received the message to start teaching about angels.
Mhm.
And I received this very distinct message, to start teaching about angels. But our fear sometimes can hold us back.
Of course.
And
Okay.
it's the power of our intention, it's the power of our love, it's the power of peace that allows us to connect to that higher, experience um, and to experience, the fear will hold us back from connecting. So if we can just let go of the fear and just trust in our own instincts and trust in our own love and trust in our own heart, this is why it's challenging. I know a lot of people who will, lose children or anyone else close in their life, and they want to be able to connect, but the grief
Yeah.
disconnects us, and
Yeah.
that's okay. That's
That's
that's the
okay.
experience.
Yes.
It's totally okay. So instead of trying to connect at that point when you're experiencing deep grief, it's just allowing for the fact that they're still there, it's still talking to them, even though you may not be able to, your station may not be tuned in yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just open up the possibility and eventually the station will tune in.
Well, I like the practicality of that you're going to be going through such a deep depth of grief, and to allow both for the grief as well as for the possibility they are still with you, talk with them. Now, what I'm hearing you say with the letter writing is that you are in a place of love.
Mhm.
Good. Because I'm imagining, even for myself, because I've done these practices, is that it, for me at least, it can be a really fine line between, is this me or is this them? And how do I know the difference? And is it just holding faith? How do you help people navigate that?
That's a really good question. And it really is I'm so glad that you brought up that space of love because when you're writing that letter from a place of love and connection. We have a misconception, and it's been multiplied over the years that grief is love, love is grief, that these things are intertwined, and it's not true. Like what happens is people are afraid to let go of their grief because they think if I let go of my grief, I'm letting go of the person.
Yeah, it's like a betrayal to get better.
Exactly. Exactly. Allow your grief, but also allow your joy. In the middle of the grief, when you have those happy moments, it's common to feel guilty for having the happy moments, but just allow all of it. Allow all of it to unfold. There's no guilt in being stricken, and there's no guilt in feeling happy. I remember after my brother's funeral, we were all sitting around my mom and dad's house, eating lunch, barely eating, and and my brother had a tremendous sense of humor. My whole family does. I don't know if I got that bone in my body, but everybody has this tremendous sense of humor. And somebody said something funny, and you could just feel like everybody kinda half laughed, and then we all we
Mm.
can be happy because we just buried John.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But what if it's and both?
Yes.
Yeah.
What if it's, you know, and I compare that to the experience we had a couple of weeks ago when we were all together. 3 of my 4 living children live near me with their kids, and we were all gathered together, and my daughter started talking about, Carrie, my older daughter started talking about my daughter Carrie who had passed away and laughing about some experiences she had with her and how, she was just this, like, funny little 10-year-old girl that was teasing her boyfriend, my older daughter's boyfriend, trying to get his attention as a 10-year-old, and
Mhm.
we were just laughing, we and we there was no guilt in laughing. right? And that's the healing space. So when we can when we're writing that letter, expressing the love, remembering the happy memories, and that's why it's challenging, right? Because early in grief, the happy memories are sad.
Yes.
But over time, and as you heal, and it's not time that heals, it's time is a factor. If
Mhm.
there's effort involved, there's good tools that are involved, there's a lot involved in healing. But over time and as you heal, the good memories become good memories again, and
Mhm.
that's why it's so important to disconnect the grief from the loss. So when you're in that space again where you can remember them and those happy memories are happy again, then that's the space where you you can always connect with them, but that's the space where you may start receiving.
Mm.
And so it's a practice. It's a practice. You write the letter and then you listen and you write down whatever you receive, whether that's a word, whether that's a sentence, whether you're thinking you're making it all up, keep going, keep practicing, and it will evolve over time. That was a long explanation, but I hope that was helpful.
Well, I just love one thing is that the pulling apart that you were saying, because it is when you can writing down first, I think is a wonderful idea, and then letting the automatic writing come after because you're pulling it apart, and it's in those quiet moments when, okay, I've already written, so now I'll be quiet. That's when they come in. That's
Yeah.
when they're able to speak because you've cleared your mind a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're connecting through the happy memories.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say is that I imagine on the other side of the veil when they are watching, witnessing the laughter that pleases them so dearly. You know, that's what they
Absolutely.
want. That's what they want, and that forges the connection even more effortlessly.
Yeah. Yeah. They love being remembered. They love when we could remember with joy.
Yes.
And when we remember with joy and gratitude, love and gratitude, we raise our vibration to meet their vibration.
Yes.
Yeah.
My goodness, time is going by so very quickly. It's been so extraordinary to hear your stories. I have one final question, and then I want to open it up to Bernadette if she has any questions, and of course, any final thoughts you'd like to share. But my question is, when you think about all of the channeling you've done through your family and your angels, as well as doing it for others, thematically, what are some of the messages that seem to come through most often?
That's such a great question. I have learned so much. They teach me so much every time. But you know, obviously a big message is that they're here, that they love us, that they support us. And the other huge message is for us to center ourselves in our heart. To be like we each, let me see if I can simply explain this. We each have a light within us that is connected to the divine. We have a divine center. And when we acknowledge, connect to our divine center, we grow that divine center, we grow our light. And they want us to have that divine power. They want us to cultivate that light within us. That is what is going to allow us and bring us through life's challenges is when we can be centered on that divinity that is always within us. And we all know people who have disconnected from their divine center, and we all know people who have cultivated that divine center. And it's just um, it's just an invitation for us to cultivate that, to feed that divine center, to sit in stillness, um, to understand how precious. They used that exact word not long ago. How precious each of us are.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
My thoughts, I don't have a question so much just other than to confirm, and I hope that the listeners are hearing those really important things, especially what you just said about or Divine Center. I think you did a beautiful, they are speaking so beautifully through you that it is, it will help so many of those that are listening as they're going through their own troubles, whether they've had a loss. It doesn't have to be the loss, losing somebody. It can be another difficulty, but you're sharing the connection with the angels has just been beautiful.
Thank you.
Mm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the way you shared it. And speaking of the light, it is that beacon of light that people are looking for. So it matters.
Yeah.
Where can they find you?
So they can reach me at juliecluff.com. I'm also on Instagram, and I will say juliecluff.com is under construction at the time of this recording. So hopefully, it'll be, everything is always in flux, right? Uh, but yeah, juliecluff.com. I'm also on Instagram, Julie Cluff Coaching. And I actually have a Facebook page too, which is Build a Life After Loss with Julie Cluff. So it's kind of everything is a little bit different, but it's all the same. So it's good.
All different portals to reach you. Wonderful. And so please, we ask the audience, we are so eager to grow the channel to get these important messages out there. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. It helps elevate all of us as we find our way through.
Yeah. It was such a pleasure, Julie.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.